temperature. If you constantly had 1.5 degrees warmer than you're meant to be, you're in a continual state of fever. That's how serious. Imagine living your entire life through having a fever all of the time. And we've got to achieve this by 2030. That's where the feeling is. It keeps chopping and changing, but it is absolutely about the here and the now. Are those slides coming through yet? I might just stop just for a moment and could you go to the next one?
Yeah, it says it's sharing. Is it not at your end?
Well, I've just got the first slide at my end here. It's not moving on to the next slide. If you could see if it moves on from yours. There we go. Okay. So yeah, so if you just just stop there, that from that. So and you just click the button again. That's the point of fever. So if you could move on to the next slide, Beth, and we'll just do it that way. So 2030, I've just mentioned that. Move on to the next one, please. So sedentary behaviours. Oops, just missed that. The point is that sedentary behaviours are unbelievably carbon intensive because of the amount of electricity and power we are actually using to be sedentary, whether that be through the food that we eat, just spending ages watching the television, through excessive driving. So sedentary behaviour is and tackling it, and that's what we do all day, is a major tactic towards reducing carbon emissions. If we go to the next slide. So it's about conscious leaders, and I'm not going to spend loads of time about what the concept is, but hopefully that slide there shows you it's this ability for us as leaders to share what we're thinking about it and getting others to embrace it. If you go to the next slide. And the point about this is that I think part of the leader, you need a bit of humour in this. It is unbelievably scary and frightening, the whole thing about climate change. But we know from behaviour change models that if you go down that line, you don't change behaviour. So somehow we need to bring the power and the excitement of sport to help people to change their behaviours to act it. And I think we can do that through sport and humour. And if you go to the next slide as well, please. But it's also about, it's an energy crisis, about bringing our energy and our support to this. There are so many doom merchants at the moment going around that certainly about if being a climate conscious leader, let's tell a story that is about what can happen and make sure, as this picture is trying to show, that it's inclusive of lots of different people. It's not just people like ourselves who have an interest. We've got to bring those along who have yet to see the importance of this. Next slide. And I think one of the other things of recognising as a leader is that our traditional model is that bit on the left that we've seen, and I'm deliberately saying it this way, that man, as in the male, sees them top of this sort of network across through nature, when what nature sees us is very much as on the right-hand side of that eco, that we're all equal, that there's this interconnection between all of us. And I think as well, we can use sport to begin to tell that story in a different way. Next slide. And this is the only heavy text slide I'm going to be using today. But as I've thought about it, these are the four sort of statements that underpin me as a leader trying to get to change people's thoughts and ideas about what's happening on the climate. The first thing is committing that this is about everyone, not just us as human beings. So often the debate is about we need to save ourselves as a species. No, it's about saving every living thing on the planet and doing that in a genuine way. It's that future concerns for future generations I'm able to enjoy today because of the actions of the people who've come before me. That it is a living thing, it's not an entity. And that final thing which sport has been, I think at times over, is that we can just take. We have to realise there's a limitation on what we can and can't do and move forward on that basis. Next slide. So in one way, we have to be the voice for the planet, and that's great. And all of us as adults can do that. And we shouldn't be scared about what we can and can't do. Just say something. That's all that matters. And if we could go to the next one after this as well. But the journey so far has been very much described through the voices of adults, people like me. And we somehow need to bring lots of children and young people into this debate about sustainability in sport, because they're the people who are going to be living here for the future, and they've got some amazing ideas. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So let's move on again. So at this time, I'm just going to say, put the questions down in the chat. I'll certainly answer them all after the session, but have a think and please put things down there. So how am I using as a leader? I'm using the term be active. If you go to the next slide, please. And what this is a terminology to try and help me think of all of the different ways of doing it. So what does the BE stand for? Well, that stands for better earth, a better environment. And I'll now explain what the other 6 letters for. Move on to the first one. So, okay. Is to acknowledge. So often this debate's about polar bears, and they are struggling at the moment. But have we absolutely acknowledged the climate crisis within the organisations we lead, or the organisations in which we can influence in terms of a sporting context? There's very few and little information about how sport and physical activity does this at the community level. Quite a lot at the elite level, but not at the community level. So we all need to step up our efforts there. Let's move on to the letter C. What this stands for is what can we change back in our place of work, in what we do on a daily basis. And there is so much that we can do. And it doesn't matter how little it is. It's just as leaders going with our colleagues, sharing with others. If you could do this, that's the recycling, as we all know, rethinking about how we travel, all of those things. And moving on to the letter T, the whole key thing here, this is the biggest health crisis we are ever going to face as a human species. And we have a critical role to play. I was listening to a conference where the head of the UK Health Security Agency was talking about, and he was explaining that there is a hot and a cold plan for the weather in the United Kingdom. And in both cases, the biggest killer is respiratory disease. And he said to that, the thing about this is there's no vaccine for that. The only way you can protect yourself as an individual from that is to have a better pair of lungs, and that comes from being physically active. So we have amazing opportunity to help tackle the health crisis that is around climate change. And we'll move on to I, about inequalities. It's so easy to see the flooding and everything as to somewhere in the South Pacific or the sub-Saharan desert or places like that. And they are feeling the effect of the actions that we've done over many years here in the West. But this whole issue of inequalities is also here now in the UK. If you could go to the next slide, please. And this picture is taken from a community. Oops, just jump back a second. It's from not my side of the Pennines, your side of the Pennines. And as you can see, they're flooded. The way to solve these sort of issues is to have better green spaces that could hold back the water sufficiently that the properties. And it's those who are already facing the greatest inequalities that we're working with in sport that are facing the greatest effects of climate change. So inequality should be absolutely core at the work we're doing around climate change. And if we move on to the next one, we've got to make this visible. Today's Sport England strategy is great because it's absolutely putting at the core of it. But we tend at the moment just to do something on Earth Day or whatever. And if you can move on to the next slide, you'll see that the BBC, and this is what I think we need to be encouraging our organisations, in everything they absolutely do, they are now somehow or some way feeding in the message of environmental sustainability. So I don't know if you've noticed a number of police dramas, they're now using electric vehicles. Comedy series, they're showing it. We know it's on BBC Sport. Even EastEnders is talking about that. And I'm not sure who the guy up in the top left-hand corner is, but he seems to be doing a lot as well. And then finally, as this sort of giving a framework for us as a leaders, is the letter E. We can move on to that. And I think again here is that it's unbelievably pessimistic at times, this whole thing about climate change. And when you read about the behaviour change, people are much more likely to act if they're enthused to act rather than to have this sort of terrible future that is. We know it's going to be tough. So how can we bring the excitement and the enthusiasm of sport to evoke the necessary action that needs to go forward? So if you just move on again, that's where I use as this sort of framework in my mind of, if I'm doing those 6 things as a leader, then I'm making a contribution towards climate change and environmental sustainability. And hopefully you'll see it's something that's easy to explain to other people. So let's move on again. Okay, if there's anything sort of questions or whatever you would like to ask me, we will stop in about another 10 minutes, but please put it down in the chat, and whether I can answer it today or not, I will answer it later on. We'll move on again. So we've got uniting the movement, and what I want to try and show is that I think for all of us who are leaders or find ourselves in a position of leadership, that we need to make the connection between inequalities and climate change and start that shout and that promotion for it. So in uniting the movement, absolutely unbelievably strong about inequalities, but there was basically just half a page about environmental sustainability, how things have changed over the last 2 years. So let's move on again. And you'll have seen in lots of things in the press, there's climate justice for all. We must do that. And if you could just move on again, Beth, that'd be great. And we're very proud in sport of what we've done in and around inequality. But we also need to recognise it's perhaps taken us 30 to 40 years to get where we are today, and we simply don't have that time in climate change. So what are the lessons from the inequalities debate? And yes, we've made lots of progress, but we know we've still got so much more to make, and we as leaders should be leading that charge. Is what can we do to learn from that to speed up the process we need? So moving on again, and perhaps one of the things which is quite we need to reflect on, that when I've gone looking at the unequal of climate change, there is lots from the world of arts, there's lots from the world of heritage, but there isn't a lot in the literature and the examples coming from sport and physical activity. So let's rethink about, as leaders, our work around inequalities and how do we describe that in a much more environmental sustainable way and an enthusiastic way. So we can move on again as we go through this. And it's actually quite easy. This was a diagram I picked up from the United States, and really showing how physical activity, sport, and if you're facing inequalities, the linkage and why we need to make this connection work. The top bit across, and that's why some of the terminology is not quite what we would use in the UK. That's if you have all of those, you are at risk and facing inequalities. The hazards across the bottom then increase that risk by tenfold. And in the last year, we had all of those 4 things in a significant way here in the UK. So there's that clear connection between the groups that we're already working with, which are along the top of the in the white section, and the fact that climate change will make those inequalities greater. So what can we use to sport to pick on that? Well, I've got some ideas if we move on again. Here's off the BBC website, and this shows you the temperature of built-up areas compared to green areas, and there can be a massive huge difference of up to 50% in temperatures, and the people that are facing the greatest inequalities largely live in those built-up areas and have the least access to the green space. So if we move on again, as an example here, and this was a neighbourhood up in Scotland from last year, and as you can see, the street on the left hand side doesn't really have any trees. The street 500 meters away does, and there was a 5 degrees C hotter difference between the two. So again, our work about creating green spaces and making sure those green spaces are a massive contribution to climate change and deals with the inequalities issue at the same time. But whilst those houses sort of look similar, that's not fair as well. That if you are from an ethnic minority background, almost 40% live in the least green space deprived areas. So again, all that work that we're trying to get through uniting the movement to create inequalities, let's think of it in an environmental sustainability way, because whether you've got a health condition, a disability, green spaces are vital, and that's how we can fight back on climate change. And moving on again. So don't believe me, I would absolutely recommend to you to listen to this YouTube by David Lammy, talking about what it was to be a young person in Tottenham in the 1970s, and how climate justice and racial justice and the value of physical activity all have such a great contribution together. We'll move on again. So I'm going to stop at that point. I don't know if anybody's got any questions. It's okay if you don't want to ask any questions, but I would say please reflect on what I'm saying today before we move on again. Okay, we'll crack on. So next bit about this. So another thing about having a climate conscious leader is to think about that leaders often find themselves in a position where they are going to get challenged. I would argue that you're not a leader if you're not in a position where you're going to get challenged. And what these 6 pictures are trying to show is that there have been many times when very great and fantastic people have stood up to be as a leader and have used sport as the power to make that change and to make that statement. And they've done that at considerable risk to their own safety. Emily Davis, from up at the top, she lost her life at the Derby for women's right, to people just being absolutely castigated aside. When it comes to climate change, where are we going to be as leaders? If you could move to the next slide. Because those who are fighting climate change and wishing to make a change about climate change are increasingly using sport as a way of making that. I don't know if you saw last night, but in the Manchester Evening News, there was an article about how a group of environmentalists are targeting British Cycling for their sponsorship deal with Shell, and that went up on poster boards all over the city. Where are we going to see? We could get very upset by all of this, but actually I think it shows that sport is the medium that lots of these challenges are. So we need to stand up and work out our position in this, because I think what has been shown is that the people who've been protesting in the long term through using sport have been proven to be right. Which side of the fence are we going to be when climate change and sport is being used in this way? So that's about where that is. But there's another aspect about being leaders, which if we could move on to the next slide, please. Now, these are some of the people, and the person down in the right-hand corner, there's a qualification to that person, but the other 2 are absolutely seen as massive leaders in the world of environmental sustainability and have made a huge contribution to the debate. The point about this slide for me is they're all actually called David, and they're all actually white, and they're all actually male, and they're all actually quite middle class. And my connection to the David on the left-hand side is that his family and my family are both from the same part of the area, Wash Valley in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, so a bit of a connection there. But if it's just about white middle class men, as much as their opinion matters, we are going to fail. So let's use the power of sport to bring in lots of different types of leaders, and it not just be white middle class men that are leading this debate, but that we can use the power of sport to bring in so many other voices to make the change and take it forward on that basis. So we could move forward to the next slide. Oh, here's another white middle class guy. Well, this guy's an American, and he talks about if you're in the stands and chatting all those environmentalists, they're doing a great job, etc., you're actually endorsing the opposition. The only place to be, as he made better way, is on the pitch and doing the action. So I would encourage you to listen to John Bywin, that the times come where we really must use leadership, inequalities and climate change together. Moving on again. So there is a bit of a breakout here. These are Olympians. They're all standing up now for climate change and environmental sustainability. And again, I'm going to be a bit tough here. There's not many older faces in that picture, is it? Because they're Olympians. And it is about elite sport. Where is the equivalent of this in community sport? We need to brigade ourselves now and get those voices. And this is in no way to criticise elite sport, because I've got a big background in that. But if we could just move to the next slide. All of the work that we're doing around it, let's see if we can get all of those alternative voices, bringing them in, being community champions, not just for physical active sport, but explaining why walking and cycling, why green spaces, all these things are so important. That would be an amazing movement for the planet. It would massively help physical activity and sport to move forward, and we would see being as an inclusive organisation. So we'll move on again to another slide. And my final point about this, about leaders and understanding the linkage between physical activity and sport and the wider thing, is the very act of demonstrating about climate change is through the act of moving and is through the act of walking. There's that fundamental connection. We don't obviously see it because we get stuck by the banners. Now, am I going to go out on a march like something like that? Perhaps not. For many others, but that's where we can use our everybody turning up to the community games each week, playing in the community. That's the way that we move. That's the way we create a movement, and then we can be seen to supporting wider initiatives like that. So it's bringing creative and thinking, and that's where we need, I think, as leaders, to talk about this and bring it out into the front. Moving on again. So what might be this is understanding the agenda. I think as leaders, we need to do that. I fundamentally believe that we've got to connect that into climate justice. It links massively into uniting the movement. Can we make that? We've got to work out where our place is in the process. Some of us are never going to go on a march, some of us, but we can all help to make the change. I think absolutely also that my hope is that whenever Active Lancashire do something like this again, it won't be somebody like me doing the presentation. It will be another type of voice that's being heard. But we can all bring that enthusiasm and excitement to this debate. Let's move on again. So I'm going to shut up just for a moment there, because we're nearly halfway, just to reflect on that. And if there is anybody who wants to ask a question, that's great, or please put something down in the chat. Okay, we're going at a pace. Let's move on again to another aspect about all of this. So I said I'd come back to young people. Well, here's the stat from the UK Climate Commission that 4 in 5 young people say the problem of climate change is important to them. If only that's what young people were saying about sport and physical activity, our jobs would nearly be complete, but they're not. So actually, perhaps climate change may be the way that we can engage more young people in sport and physical activity. If we could just move it on again, because they've got some amazing creative ideas. I love this slide because this is how a group of young people in America redefined Halloween. Don't make it about ghouls, make it about the climate and all the changes. So again, part of, I think, a role as conscious leaders about climate change is how do we bring the voice of young people in and let that voice flourish and let that voice move forward without sort of going, well, that's rather good, well done. That's something we need to be thinking about in everything that we do. And if we move on again, please, I came back to this slide. The fact of the matter is, the young people will be living their entire lives through a climate crisis. So we absolutely, I believe, should be there. And the fact, as we know, and Sport England showed this morning, 120,000 football games have been cancelled over the last year because of the climate. I think one of the challenges is to get young people's voice up front and centre in the way that sport and physical activity is run in this country, and doing that through an environmentally sustainable way. So if we could just move again, another pause for thought. Please think when you go back about what we need to be doing about young people. Oops.
I was just going to stop sharing to see if
Sure.
that helps really, so that
Yeah.
we're bringing everyone back in the room.
Fantastic. That's brilliant.
What do we think a good way of actually engaging with young people to the extent we need then? I guess is my question. Obviously,
Well, I think, yeah, for me, Callum, it's as simple as this. I think so often as adults, we plan children's and young people's activities in the way that we wish them to be. And I think this is a massive call out to really listening back to them how they would like to organise their activity. And I'm using a bit of an extreme example of, but how often as coaches we want to get to the top of the league, and is that really the motivation of the young person, the child in that team, or is it more about their friends? So I think this is even more of a call out to listen to what children and young people have to say about what they wish to do, rather than just assuming we know because we were a child and we were a young person. And that takes time.
So is that more of a, I guess in terms of sport then it's more of a holistic approach to, rather than just being we're a sports thing, we do sports things. It's been like, well, what do you want to do with your time? And we're going to play a bit of sports as well.
Exactly. I mean, I have a big background in canoeing, which is now paddle UK. The sport's fundamentally changing because young people of today want to paddle in a different way. I think the Olympics is super important for canoeing, but if you look at the membership of the organisation, that's not where it is. It's now about very much about environmental sustainability, being in the outdoors and all the values. And I'm not saying the Olympics is wrong, but I think there's that recognition that our structures are perhaps falling behind in recognising where environmental sustainability takes you and what people wish to do with their lives and be active in their lives. So I haven't got any answers. I think it's a discussion, and hence why today's discussion. We just need to keep chatting about this.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, shall I share the
Yep.
slides again, David?
Thank you, Beth. So it's with that time to come to action now. So what might we do? If you can move to the next slide. Well, I've put this up. You've got a friend in me. Leadership can be incredibly lonely, whether you're the CEO of an organization or the manager of a team or wherever you'll find yourself in the structure, because obviously there's the concept of distributed leadership. Nobody knows how to solve this problem. And the last question from Callum really just illustrated that we're all seeking. So absolutely having those discussions and talking to each other. What do you think about this? Because actually you may just have discovered a great way to move things forward. So I think one of the key things of being a conscious climate leader is our ability to recognise who our friends are and to use our friends to help solve this. And isn't that what sport's all about at its very core? Moving on again. There's also loads and loads of stuff to help you on there if you go looking. I don't get any money for doing this, but Mike Berners-Lee, who's at the University of Lancaster, is one of the world's leading experts on climate change. He's published this fantastic book, and there's loads of examples in there about the carbon footprint and as it relates to physical activity. And one of the ones I really like is it's great going on a bicycle unless you've had a McDonald's, then you've lost all of the climate emissions about going on the bicycle. So he's got all of those creative little things. And by the way, bananas are good for you and climate friendly. Well, there we go, Kate. Fantastic. Also, I'm using this as a bit, there's lots of publicity out there, and there's something that's really quite common in all of this, is that if you look at the words along the bottom, physical activities there, it's walk. We're seen as part of the solution. We're seen, even if they perhaps haven't understood that we are. So the whole point is that there is a willingness, and I think we need to step up into our challenge. And I can perhaps better illustrate this with this next slide about what we need to be doing is, here I went to a conference and they put the slides up from everybody in the audience who'd been asked to vote on 11 things that you think are the best actions to reduce the amount of carbon. And as you can see from the people in the room, they put shift to cycle walking in the 9th position, when actually it's the second best way of reducing carbon emissions out of all of that list. And you look at some of the things. So even there's not that understanding, but we're there that can make that big contribution at a local level or in our governing body or in our active partnership, wherever that might be. So let's be proud of it and talk about it with confidence as a fantastic way. There's also this is called a SUD, which is a sustainable urban drainage device. And what this is all about is that flooding is one of our biggest things. So this is creating open space that just holds the water back enough. So it doesn't have to be these huge, awful things. There's lots of ways we can create small, creative, great green devices which hold back the water and allow us to be physically active. So it's not just about walking, cycling. We can change our environment for the better. So that's possible action. Moving on again as to another action. It would be absolutely wrong when we're in Mental Health Week and all of the great work that we do in sport around that. And there's lots of leadership in this about the importance of mental health. What is massively moving is eco-anxiety. And I was reading around some research as well, that the biggest thing that destroys your mental health on a long-term basis, because you don't anticipate it, is flooding and your house being flooded and all of the awful things that lead on from there. So there is that thing of let's do those devices that reduces the risk of your flooding, but also tackling the worry and the around mental health around ego. And if you talk to the doctors, talk to UK Health Security Agency, OHID, etc., the best thing they can say is the most positive action is do something in the environment, go walking, plant something, be outside. That's the best way to do the eco action. That's what we're doing. So let's bring that into our leadership strategies. And we'll move on again. And this is the point here that, and I could have picked up loads and loads of these. Everybody's climate action plan seems to have something to do about sport and physical activity, and yet when you read it, there's not the connections there. We need to be looking at the transport and land use is obviously one on this, the urban forest and open space is another one, the energy we can link into all those. So it's actually for us to explain as leaders to others. It's not that they're trying to exclude us. We just need to make that connection from them. If we could do that, we'd massively move forward the whole debate because we're ready and willing to help the mitigation from climate change. And we'll move on again. Now, I did say about the ability of bringing humour and excitement and into this. So this guy had this bright idea of I'm going to look at the football clubs and do some interesting t-shirts around environmental sustainability. And here's a little bit of homework for you. When you've left today, go and have a look how many football clubs either have a nickname related to something in nature or that's in their logo as well. There's a big connection here. The point about this linking up with Hull City was, and they've now developed this relationship in with the World Wildlife Fund, is to make the connection about tigers in the wild and they could all be lost by 2070. The next one I am going to put a bit of a health warning on because I am a Derby County supporter. As far as I'm concerned, forest can burn. But the point about this is But even is that isn't that a creative way of doing it and brings it home? And my whole point again here, as a Derby fan, which is the Rams, there you go, connection to nature, and with Forest, this is something we can have a good chat about and actually join together, and rather than our traditional library. So think about that humour and think about using sport in a creative way to do it. And we'll move on again. So my final bit before we move into what Sport England have talked about today is I've just encouraged you, if there's one thing you can do as a leader, and about is just make that commitment to have the conversations. When Beth rang me up to do this, that's why I wanted to do it. Whether it's any good or not, it doesn't really matter. We're having the conversation. I hope that it's been of some use to this morning. So we'll move on again. And I just want to, and before we go into uniting the movement, is there any questions on that? And then we'll have a quick run through what is in the Sport England strategy. Okay, let's go through the Sport England strategy then. So it's come out this morning. It's Chris Ballman, who is the absolute chair of this, massive champion. The reason why it's called Every Move is because absolutely everything that Sport England is now going to do is through that sustainability lens, and that's what they want to see in the system as a whole. And I would thoroughly encourage you to go on the, that's okay, go onto the website. There's a fantastic little 2-minute 30 video to explain it. This is what's at the core of the strategy, and hopefully this has come through this morning as well, that yes, uniting the movement was about participation and it was about inequalities. What shifted over the last 2 years is what binds those two things together is climate change. And therefore we need to look at it in the round of those three things as we set about as leaders to get the nation physically active. If we move to the next slide, here's the outline of the strategy, and I'm not going to go through this in any great detail because it's published on the Sport England website. What I am going to do though is to come down to some of those priority themes and levers for change over the next 4 slides that they're looking for us as a sector to deal with and for us to give leadership on. So if we move to the next one, please. So this is about this support and capability building. What they're very much looking for is the creation of coalitions, and that could be at national level, a local level, a community level. They're going to set out to create more tools and resources. If you've seen the Bubble resource, that's great, deliver training, and courses like the Climate Fresh. So there's going to be lots of help and support there. My fear is that if we as leaders are not championing this, it will just get put on the shelf. So the plea from people, from me, and I know from Sport England, is let's get this information out as far and as wide as we possibly can. And that's always what went slow with the inequalities. It was there, but there was never the pressure to do it at the speed that it was required. Let's not make that mistake again with environmental sustainability. So the second of the areas, moving on, is about leveraging their investment. There is going to be something in sports governance, and ourselves as leaders will know all about that, but they're very clear that it's going to be proportionate to a club level to the big organisations. And but here's the key point and why we need to get rid of it. By 2027, if anyone who is a significant funded partner of Sport England will have to have a substantial environmental sustainability plan in place and showing that the action they talk about enabling and requiring people to do. But what can we do today? The Movement Fund is out there. It's the first time there's an explicit mention about environmental sustainability, a brilliant way to support our local clubs and communities to do something now in anticipation of some of the other things on that list happening. So I'd encourage you to find out the Movement Fund and get your organisations implying into that. And what I should also say is the singles thing has been about flooding. Anyway, let's move on to advocacy. Massive amount of work to go in around this, awareness raising activities, the visuals. Again, please go on the website. There's a great little video, which is a way to share. You'll see they massively put the thing about climate injustice in there. And as hopefully it's come out this morning, this whole thing about thought leadership, the answers are within us as a group. And then the final one on the thing is this connections into the natural and built environment. That's what's been missing out the strategies. It's almost like we as sport have been doing something over here and not realizing our contribution in the natural world. So what do AGPs mean? It's artificial grass pitches, is that the massive shift away from that rubber infill. And I'm again not going to go through all of the items because the presentation was shared afterwards, but that building resilience to climate change, and that comes back to this value of the green spaces, the value of our built structures to reduce carbon emissions, but also make us secure for the future. So what might 2050 be like? If we just move to the final slide. That's how they're anticipating it will be, these 4 areas of zero carbon and climate resilience, nature's thriving, lots of community hubs in place, and active design has become the norm. I'll stop at that moment again if anyone's got any questions, but I think the best thing is actually go to the website. Okay, well, I think you can stop the presentation there, Beth, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Beth will share my emails if you don't feel confident speaking to me today. I will give a big shout out for Active Lancashire though. Thank you so much for doing it, because that's showing advocacy. That's showing taking this issue serious. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today, but also I think Active Lancashire, thank you for being a leader as an organisation. But happy to answer any questions you may have, and like I say, we'll share the presentation.
David, there's a couple in the chat from Andrew Whitaker.
Okay.
What should we be doing as system partners to unite? As you know, disabled people do want to be activity in outdoor places, but places are not always accessible.
Yeah.
Is the first question.
Thank you for that, Andrew. So there's 3 things for me. Firstly, hopefully it's come through this presentation, we cannot solve the climate crisis without tackling inequalities. And inequalities, and I could have used disability, gender, race, whatever, that has to be the driver for the work, because those individuals facing those inequalities are also those who are facing the greatest challenges from climate change, but as a generalization are not the ones who are producing the emissions. So if ever this was a chance to supercharge all of the great work that has gone on so far, let's use climate change to do that. The second point in this though is, and this is my point about I was trying to make with the children, is that let's not assume that we know what those people think they know. This has got to be the point where they are leading the action. That was my point about asking about children designing what they want to do to play sport, rather than perhaps a 19th century approach of people. So that's the second thing of, are we really engaging people into that? And then the third bit for me is, and I'll come back to my point about this, and you know, I've got nothing against white middle class men. I'm one of them. But this debate has to be described through the voices of others. If it is not being described through the voices of others and people like me, we are massively failing in sport. Now, I can do my part to encourage others, but we all need to be doing that and finding those fantastic voices and taking it forward. So they would be the 3 things for me. Not easy things to do, but this has got to be that moment to do those 3 things. And I think as a system, we can do that. But and I hope, and I have fed this into the Sport England action plans, that there will, when they talk about enabling, requiring, they are going to make sure they very well link the Code of Sports Governance and the DIAPs into this work, and that there is a bit of like nice words from you, David, but no action. You know, there has to be that sort of stick element to this, as much as we massively know it's going to be driven by the carrot. So that would be my 3 suggestions, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and obviously representation was one of the things. And I know, obviously, we know each other away from the call and things, and I love that you did embed the inequalities throughout. I think it's just more, as you said, raising that awareness that actually we are all in it together, and it's how we unite. and we take that intersection approach into it, but make sure that we design it for people that really do tackle the more stubborn inequalities. And today is a start from that to have the conversation. I think it's now, you mentioned it about the carrot and the stick almost.
Yeah.
How do we hold ourselves to account, and what is our role within that system, where we get it right, so it helps to enable others as well. So that's what I mean. I think there's further discussions for us to explore, and obviously we'll welcome that. And obviously my second question was around that representation. It's vitally important. It's more than kind of climate changes issue. I think we all know that, but how can we learn from getting it right in, or getting it better in one space? And you're also right, everyone has a right to be at that table, but how do we get it better in one space and learn from that to make activity, sport, physical activity more inclusive and representative for people that we want to be involved?
Yeah. And if I may come back on that, Beth, what was interesting about that picture of the Olympians, there weren't very many Paralympians in the picture. And
I did notice.
fed that back when I saw it, and I thought, you know, here we go again. You know, it's like, look, it's, you know, the climate just goes after human beings. That's the top and bottom of it. But the degree to which it goes after human beings is if you've got some form of inequality in your life. I mean, one of the things again is Sport England are producing their inequalities matrix and showing that if you've got at least 3, that's where the focus is. Sounds like I'm being a naughty boy here, and not. I've challenged back and gone, so what's the implication then for sustainability? Because if you're going down that model, if you've got 3 challenges in your life, well then how are we making it more sustainable? Because just saying you've got 3 challenges is great, but the point is it's going to be even harder moving forward for those people that have those challenges.
Thanks,
and I haven't played
Andy.
the bananas game, so I'm going to do that.
Thank you. I'm just obviously one of the messages for myself was around the small gains really in this life manifesto, and not to put them on the spot, but we've got Callum and Shell on the call from Active Lancashire, who are part of a sustainability working group for Active Lancashire. And I just thought, for the benefit of others on the call, I didn't know whether you could just explain a few things that we're doing at Active Lancashire that might then inspire others within within their workplaces on those kind of little small wins. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Beth. You want me to go, Callum, or do you want to go?
Go on, you got in there first, so I'll just
cheers.
mop up whatever's left.
It may be a bit noisy here. I'm actually at the recycling shop, so there you go. There's one thing that we're doing. We have a cycle recycle project, as I think David is aware. So the sustainability working group, really, we've kind of pulled together, and it goes across the organisation, so we try to get different people involved. And it's one of those that we don't want it to be a talking shop, because a lot of things end up being a talking shop. So we have got the action plan in place, but we are regular meeting and trying to do things. Some of the things that we've looked at recently, school games offer, we've kind of brought that to a local level to minimise travel, and we're looking at different ways that we can make that a little bit more environmentally friendly. And obviously bringing that message into the children as well, which is obviously kind of the young people, which is obviously what we've talked about, getting them involved and almost bringing that message to them quite early. We do the recycling stuff, which is part of a lot of our delivery. We have 2 recycle shops, and we're trying to kind of link that back into what it actually means. It's all right having a cycle shop, but what does that mean? So, you know, the impact, the carbon reduction and all that, reducing landfill and things like that. So for us, I think what our biggest issue is at the minute is we do, and a lot of people do small things, and those small things add up, but we probably don't actually count them. So we don't add them up. And I think that's a big thing for the sustainability group, is actually saying we do this, but this is what it actually is, and this is what it impacts on. I don't know of anything else, Callum, that we're doing at the minute.
I mean, yeah, I guess those are probably the 2 of the biggest impact things we're potentially doing, is the active seconds and the active cycle shops, because that's reducing waste and reusing stuff rather than buying new. Also tackling inequalities through that as well, by offering bikes at a reasonable price for people, rather than having to buy brand new ones that they can't afford in the first place. So that obviously feeds into active travel and things like that as well. It's opening up more potential for that, potentially. Yeah, I guess we are just chipping away at other little things. I mean, we're looking at our own office space and things like that in terms of just having a tidy and looking at how we can reuse stuff that basically improve our own environment, and also kind of thinking about that from a sustainability aspect. Yeah, I guess it's just at the moment we're looking at all the little things. You know, you said before, David, about not just doing something because it's Environment Day or whatever, but you know, we've looked at Green Week and we have gone, right, well, what can we do in this week? How can we just engage our team a bit more, and get them thinking about it? So yeah, I feel like it's very incremental. We're fairly new to it, but we're just trying to get the ball rolling with it, I think.
Something I should have mentioned maybe as well is looking at that governance piece. Adrian's kind of mentioned that our strategy doesn't really have too much around sustainability and environmental sustainability at the minute. And he has kind of dropped it in that we may look at adding into that. But I suppose the conversation from our point of view is, do we add into a strategy or do we create a separate strategy? As Sport England have obviously done. I suppose that's a bigger conversation. And also the sustainability group have been talking around having that kind of board influence. So have we got someone on the board that will actually be coming from this angle, which I don't think we necessarily have. I mean, there'll be some people that obviously have an interest in it from an individual level, but maybe bringing someone with some expertise onto the board that can actually question and challenge decisions. Because as you well know, a lot of the decisions around being maybe a little bit better for the environment often have a financial cost. And if we're not arguing the point, then sometimes it'll just go down to that argument, well, it costs too much. So we have kind of broached that subject, and hopefully that will go upwards to SLT, ELT, and hopefully we'll have some kind of change in the board as well.
Thanks, guys. No, that was great. And something else which has come to mind, we hold kind of team development days once a quarter and operations meetings once every couple of months as well. We've kind of put a hold on outside catering for that because we're finding that we're getting a lot of food waste. So either connecting with a local community centre to provide the food for that, or we've, like we say, we've put a hold onto that. And then the last one, actually, people had to bring in their own cups because, again, we didn't want to be using, and everyone was fine with that, weren't they? And that's just a little kind of small changes that we're making as part of our kind of team meetings as well.
Sorry, just one more thing. I was at the conference that you were at, David, the basis one. And even though it's kind of obvious when you listen to it, that the most impact that most sporting occasions, events and participation is actually transport and travel to doing whatever you're doing. So we've started to have that conversation around our sports awards as well, and looking at whether we can promote some kind of carpooling or whether we can link into public transport better. I mean, it's quite obvious when you listen to it, but I don't even know if we actually always clock that 80% of your carbon footprint for an event will be down to travel and transport. So we are talking about that as well.
And just to agree with Michelle, the Birmingham County FA have done loads of great stuff on this. And if I just may say, I know there's a bit of Michelle spoke at the Active Partnerships Convention in December last year, and it was really quite funny, even though Michelle and said, "Oh, I don't think we're that funny." That's what got everyone engaged on the day, was bringing a bit of humour and a bit of a thing in it. So, so again, I just want to stress that as leaders, you know, we might not think we're Peter Kay or somebody like that, but we can all tell things in a slightly amusing way. So let's keep doing that. So thanks for that, Michelle, because it was very funny. We're not very funny, and then you were very funny. So that was brilliant.
Thank you.
And Kate's just popped something in the chat. Smart things about websites, track emissions and people, public transport. Great. We will have a look at that. Thank you. We also did a team exercise with, let me just find it, G-Key, it's called, as a bit of a team. So you can, online survey, and then you can find out how much carbon footprint you kind of get a score on that, really. So that was just a funny exercise, really, within the team. And then we put people in order from lowest to highest, shamed them, but in a fun way. So that was great. Perfect. If there's no more questions, it's now 11, so we can wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much to David for all the time you've taken to pull those slides together and pass on your you say you're not an expert, but you're far ahead of any of us. So no, thank you so much for your time for doing that. I'll just pop into the chat a link to a survey. So obviously David and myself and Sport England as well would really appreciate your feedback. So please do take 2 minutes now just to follow that link. I promise you it isn't a long survey at all, just to get your thoughts on the last hour. I will email out the slides and the recording afterwards to everyone that's registered. We do have the next event coming up is at Lodge House in Burnley. It's on the 18th of June at 11, and it's a cinema club. So it's our second cinema club, looking at the surprising habits of original thinkers. So looking at that kind of innovative thinking piece, really. So everyone is welcome to join us then. And then we will be sharing with you our next timetable, which will take us across 6 months, so from July to December. And that will all be on Eventbrite. So if there's nothing else, thank you very much for joining us, and wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you.
you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.